Dr. King supported affirmative action. He said in 1963, "It is impossible to create a formula for the future which does not take into account that society has been doing something special against the Negro for hundreds of years. How then can he be absorbed into the mainstream of American life if we do not do something special for him now in order to balance the equation and equip him to compete on a just and equal basis?" The Civil War that freed my grandfather was fought over whether blacks and whites shared a common humanity. Less than 10 years after it ended, the nation chose sides with the losers and agreed to continue black repression for almost 100 years. American slavery was a human horror of staggering dimensions, a true crime against humanity. The profits it produced endowed great fortunes and enriched generations, and its dreadful legacy embraces us all today. 246 years of slavery were followed by 100 years of state-sanctioned discrimination, reinforced by public and private terror, ending only after a major struggle in 1965. Thus, it has been just a bit more than 40 short years that all black Americans have exercised the full rights of citizens. Only 40 years since legal segregation was ended nationwide. Only 40 years since the right to register and vote was universally guaranteed. Only 40 years since the protections of the law and Constitution were officially extended to all. And now some are telling us those 40 years have been enough. To believe that is the victory of hope over experience. To believe that is the victory of self-delusion over common sense. The modern movement for civil rights has its immediate origins in the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Brown effectively ended segregation's legality, but it also gave a nonviolent army the license to challenge segregation's morality as well. A year after Brown, an NAACP activist in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her seat on a city bus so a white man could sit down. 5 years after Montgomery, 4 black young men, college students in Greensboro, North Carolina, refused to give up their seats at a dime store lunch counter reserved for whites. These small acts of passive resistance to American apartheid and the cumulative acts of tens of thousands more created a people's movement that eliminated legal segregation in less than a decade. We ought not forget that Dr. King stood before and with thousands, the people who made that mighty movement what it was. From Jamestown's slave pens to Montgomery's boycotted buses, these ordinary men and women labored in obscurity, and from Montgomery forward they provided the foot soldiers of the Freedom Army. They walked in dignity rather than ride in shame. They faced bombs in Birmingham and mobs in Mississippi. They sat down at lunch counters so others could stand up. They marched and they organized. Dr. King didn't march from Selma to Montgomery by himself. He didn't speak to an empty field at the March on Washington. There were thousands marching with him and before him, and thousands more who did the dirty work that preceded the triumphant march. The successful strategies of the modern movement for civil rights were litigation, organization, mobilization, and coalition, all aimed at creating a national constituency for civil rights. It is sometimes that the simplest of ordinary everyday acts, sitting at a lunch counter, going to a new school, applying for a marriage license, these can have unforeseen acts. They can change the universe. They can challenge the way we think and act. Among the fruits of that movement is the most diverse field of presidential aspirants in American history. The emergence of a woman, a black, and Hispanic as leading candidates for the most powerful office in the world would have been unthinkable without the modern movement for civil rights. That movement marched and picketed and protested against state-sanctioned segregation and brought that system crashing to its knees. Today's times require no less, and in fact, insist on more. Now we find ourselves refighting old battles we thought we'd already won, facing new problems we've barely begun to acknowledge. We ought to take heart. If there's more to be done, we have more to do it with, more than those who came before us and who brought us along this far. We have a history of aggressive self-help and volunteerism in church and civic club and neighborhood association, providing scholarships, helping the needy, promoting social service. But volunteering for social service alone does very little to change the status quo. Creating change requires challenging power. It's never enough just to ignore evil. It's never enough just to do good. It's never enough just to feed the hungry and house the homeless, as commendable as these deeds are. It may be helpful to think about our task in this way. Two men are sitting by a river, and to their great surprise, they see a baby come floating down the stream. They jump in and save that child, and to their great surprise, another baby comes floating by. They jump in the water the second time, and when they've saved that child, a third baby comes down the stream. One of the men jumps in the river the third time, and the other man begins to run upstream. Come back, says the man in the water, we've got to save this child. You save it, says the running man. I'm going to find out who's throwing babies in the water, and I'm going to make him stop.